Hello and welcome back to Underlab. One question you maybe never asked or never thought about is how large exactly the underground is supposed to be. It may seem like it has an obvious answer. It's a big cavern populated with monsters. It's got to be big enough that it can contain everyone living down there, right? Well, that's true enough, but how big would it really need to be? How does the human seemingly manage to traverse the entire length of the underground without stopping to pause? Are things smaller than they seem, or is there something we're missing here? Well, let's find out. This may be a slightly silly episode, but why not take a shot at trying to work out how big the underground is? Maybe it's the size of an entire continent, or maybe it's just the size of a theme park. Maybe it's technically only a few thousand pixels big, if we want to be a buzzkill. Let's try and find out just how big the underground is. Firstly, before trying to determine anything whatsoever, we have to tackle the problem of how much of the underground we don't get to see. The underground is a giant place, and Toby Fox makes a point several times throughout our adventure of hinting that there's far more out there. One example is that we see entire inaccessible cities within the ruins and a new home, as well as being placed within vistas that allows us to see giant castles being illuminated in the distance. Somewhere like the ruins may still seem pretty finite in size, though that's only really when compared to more natural areas. For example, we see various islands that we can't reach within waterfall, and who knows where the rapids themselves lead to. There's certainly places we never get to visit, though one important factor to consider is that we seem to travel in a mostly straight line, from left to right, to reach the end of the game. Therefore, while it would be impossible to tell how much of what is in every direction, we do have a rough idea of how long it takes to cross the entirety of the underground in nothing but your shoes and a stripy shirt. Apparently, on average, Undertale takes 8 hours to complete. Now I realise that may involve plenty of talking to characters and battling monsters. But remember, this is only the average time it took players to complete the game. That takes into account those who rushed through the game as quickly as possible, but also those who took their time to explore. Therefore, it seems like a fairly reasonable number to start with. You may be wondering how we can work out how large the underground is based on the average time it takes to complete the game, but consider this. The average rate a human being walks at is 3.1 miles or 5 kilometres per hour. Therefore, 8 times 3.1 is 24.8 miles, or roughly 40 kilometres. For comparison, the city of London is 611 square miles big. Naturally, this makes the underground seem very small, and something tells me it isn't really that size. However, at the same time, we're never given much reason to believe the underground is a particularly large place. At the end of the game, we see hundreds of monster souls escaping Azrael's body, but that's exactly my point. We see hundreds, not hundreds of thousands. Considering up to 12,000 people are estimated to live per mile of London, I think it's more than plausible that hundreds of monsters could fit within an area that's 25 miles large. Numbers alone though aren't the only reason we have to believe that the underground would be quite small. I doubt the humans who sealed monster kind underground were particularly concerned for their well-being, and I suppose they simply sealed them within the first place that they'd fit in. It's believable that the humans wouldn't care if things were a little crowded for the monsters. Let's also consider the fact that the human is supposed to be a child. No matter how determined they are, the vast majority of people couldn't simply navigate hundreds or thousands of miles within a place they'd never been in before without some help. However, Frisk manages it, which implies that the underground was of a size someone their age was able to tackle, considering how rapidly the climate changes within the underground as well. From cold to damp to searing hot, each zone seems to have its own micro-ecosystem. This potentially allows us to infer that the underground is composed of several small, tightly knit areas with radically different climates based on a freak of nature. Another thing worth considering is how monsters produce their electricity. When in Hotland, we walk past the giant machine known only as the core, all in capital letters. Later on we step inside to find it to be a futuristic labyrinth. Apparently designed by Gaster, the core is where monsters produce all of their energy, allowing them to sustain their lifestyles without depending on finite resources. The core transforms geothermal energy into magical electricity, at least according to Alfie's. While the core may seem extremely impressive and huge in size, think about your average power plant in real life. Plenty of them are just as big as the core, and some are even larger. It's not hard to believe that the monsters could easily power everything they need to, with the equivalent of a single power plant if the underground is as small as we think. The core seems to be the only one of its kind, so this once again reinforces the idea that the underground is a particularly small and cramped space. Maybe it's also interesting to note that many of the things in the underground are entirely fake. Snowdin appears to be a rather large place, as we only seem to be crossing the mountaintops as we explore. Down below there appears to be a whole section of the forest we never see, but how much of it is real? Apparently the rope bridge we cross is just a masterful illusion painted by Papyrus onto a rock face. There's nothing actually below us as we cross it. It's just a matter of his painting and the perspective the player views it from. The same sort of thing happens to us within Hotland. We may believe we just entered an entire city, but really it's just a stage for Undertale the musical, as Metaton sings to us. Toby Fox seems to be actively acknowledging that the things we see in the background within video games are usually only there to make everything seem bigger than they really are. The difference in Undertale is that they really are fake. If most of the things we see for the sake of scale within Undertale are just props and illusions within the very lore of the game, then most of the area within the underground is limited to that single linear path that the human took. You don't need me to say that we're still being given the idea that the underground is a pretty tiny place. There's even more to consider though. What about Metaton? Metaton is apparently the underground's biggest star, or rather its only star. The underground is so compact that it seemingly only has room for a single celebrity. You may argue that's because he's seemingly the only one with an understanding of TV, aside from Alfie's, but you'd think more monsters would have figured it out by now. Another indicator of the size of the underground is how big Asgore's royal guard is. That is to say, it's not very big at all. We seemingly go through every guard Undyne commands within Undertale, which consists of a few dogs and skeletons in Snowdin, Undyne herself, and two slightly amorous guys within Hotland. If that's all it takes to police the entirety of the underground, there can't be much going on, and if there isn't much going on, there likely isn't much there to begin with. I find it hard to believe that such a small group of relatively incompetent guards could control a huge populace of monsters who are just aching to reach the surface. It's far more likely that there just isn't much going on within such a small and quiet area. The small guard force is a reflection of everything within the kingdom, which all operates on a very insignificant scale. Rather than having a team of researchers, Asgore only has a single royal scientist, namely Dr. Alphys, who has to do everything by herself. The royal family itself seemingly only consists of 3 members, Toriel Asgore and the deceased Prince Asriel. There's only 5 proper shops within the entire game, and one of those is hidden away within Temi Village, and another is a burger emporium. Every indication seems to point to the underground being a very small place. Now I know what you may be thinking. We may simply not get to see all sorts of places and people within the underground on our journey. However, there simply isn't much reference to a broader world within the game. Onion-san briefly mentions that the city, presumably New Home, is getting crowded, but that's all we have to help us figure out the scale of the world. That also doesn't mean much to us, as the city likely isn't very big. We get to peek at it not long before encountering Asgore, and it only lasts for a few screens. One final point that I believe confirms that the underground is a pretty small place, all things considered, is Mount Ebott. During the introduction of the game, we see the original fallen human fall within what appears to be the ruins. We know Chara, or Kara, attempted to escape the underground with Asriel, and the only point of the barrier that to our knowledge we can escape through is within Asgore's own home. When we complete the game, we're clearly standing on the cliffside of Mount Ebott, implying that the entirety of Undertale takes place within the mountain. Perhaps there's more caverns deeper down, but to cross the entire place lengthwise, you'd need only to pass through Mount Ebott. While I'm sure it's a big mountain, it still can't possibly be very large in terms of countries and continents, meaning the underground is little more than a quaint prison. It seems during the war, not many monsters at all were spared if this is what they have been reduced to, considering that they once ruled the world alongside the humans. Now that the monsters have been freed, who knows how long it'll be before a single mountain can't contain their entire species once more. We'll just have to hope that the humans don't attack again over issues of overpopulation. Well, it seems the underground is a lot smaller than many of us may have thought. Undertale does a great job of world building and leading us to believe that there's a lot going on underground, through the places we can see but not visit, and through the characters we're told about but never encounter. The truth is though that it's likely not all that big. Tell me what you think. Do you agree that the underground is pretty small, or do you feel something indicates otherwise? Let me know in the comments. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. Try not to get lost in a sprawling underground chasm, and I'll see you next time. I go, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to the scientists here at the Underlab. My head scientists, Nightcore Master, Zaki, Cameron Vigil, Kay Jensen, and Asgore N. Shi, and my Underlab scientists Crystal Sleet, Nicholas Dux, Armin Arlett, Marisa Ray, Robert Sopin, Lieutenant Omega, Manny Yak, Goncalo Rosario, Corey Kidwell, and Jeff Chan. Thanks to the generosity of every name you see here, this channel is able to keep going. If you enjoyed this video, please check out the Patreon link and the video link below that explains why I so massively appreciate your contribution.